It was a warm and pleasant day in Argentina's Tucumán province. A family had taken their children out to enjoy the calm spring air in the small town of Alberti. As the kids ran and played near a nearby soybean field, their parents kept a careful eye on them. But in a single fleeting moment, the children disappeared from sight, and their sudden screams shattered the peaceful atmosphere of Alberti, casting a dark shadow over what had been a quiet afternoon. What followed would soon unfold into a tragedy that horrified the entire province of Tucumán. You're watching Eternal Crime Files, and this is the beginning of another chilling case in our Scent of Blood series. The children's terrified screams sent everyone nearby running. Families rushed toward the dense vegetation at the edge of the field where the sounds had come from. With every step, their unease grew heavier. The scent of soil mingled with an eerie silence that seemed to hang in the air. Moments later, what they found erased all traces of the laughter from minutes earlier. Lying motionless on the ground was the body of a young girl. There were visible signs of violence around her neck, and 2 concrete bricks lay haphazardly placed above her head. In shock, the families quickly contacted the police. Officers arrived within minutes, sealing off the area and beginning a full investigation. As the forensics team conducted their first inspection, they noted severe bruising on the girl's neck consistent with pressure marks, and blunt force injuries on her head matching the bricks found beside her. There were also multiple defensive wounds on her arms and hands, signs of a brief but violent struggle before her death. The disarray of her clothing suggested the crime might have been sexual in nature. No form of identification, personal belongings, or phone were found at the scene, raising suspicions that the attack could have been planned. Once the forensic team finished documenting the site, the girl's body was sent to the lab for a full autopsy. Police began checking recent missing person reports in the area, hoping to match the description to a name. What began as a discovery in a silent field quickly evolved into a murder case that shook the entire town. After detailed physical profiling and interviews with nearby families, investigators identified the victim as 16-year-old Ornella Dottori, who had been missing since the evening of April 10th from Alberti, where she lived with her father. Her family confirmed the identification in heartbreak. With her identity established, detectives turned their attention to uncovering what led to her death. Ornella's parents had separated years earlier, and she had spent most of her childhood in Salta with her mother and grandmother. About 2 years ago, she had moved back to Alberti to live with her father, a man recently released from prison who saw her return as a new beginning. Neighbors described Ornella as lively, curious, and social, but some also mentioned that she often stayed out late at night, spending time with friends in ways that worried people in the small town. Those details, once considered ordinary teenage behavior, soon became critical clues in the investigation. Just days before the tragedy, Ornella had posted something on social media that now seemed chilling. "I feel like something bad is going to happen to me." That message gave the case an even darker edge. A few days later, the forensic lab released its preliminary report. It confirmed that Ornella's death was caused by strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. The concrete blocks found at the scene carried no fingerprints or DNA, suggesting that the killer had worn gloves or was experienced enough to deliberately avoid leaving evidence. The lack of physical clues made the investigation far more complicated, but the most shocking detail came from the autopsy. Ornella was 6 weeks pregnant. The discovery left not just investigators, but the entire town in stunned silence. Even her own family had no idea she was expecting a child. From that moment, the investigation shifted focus. It wasn't just who had killed her, but why. Detectives began digging deep into Ornella's personal life, her friends, her relationships, and everyone she had seen in recent days. Each new lead brought them closer to understanding how a bright young life had ended so violently. At first, all the investigators had was the autopsy report. No clear suspect, no motive, not even a promising lead. Every piece of evidence was re-examined, but nothing pointed to a definitive direction. Even the most seasoned detectives found themselves at a loss. Three main theories began to form. The first was tied to her pregnancy. Perhaps the father of the unborn child had been involved. The second centered on her social circle. Rumors in Alberti suggested that Ornella had recently been meeting new people, expanding her network. And the third theory involved her father's past. Having been recently released from prison, could someone from his old life have sought revenge? Police divided their work accordingly. They obtained Ornella's phone records and started reviewing security footage from around town. Detectives focused on identifying the father of the unborn child first, interviewing friends, classmates, and anyone she had recently been seen with. Still, nothing solid emerged. Then, a new rumor began spreading through the town. Some claimed that the baby's father might be a local police officer. If true, it could expose something far more sinister, a corruption scandal buried within the very system investigating the case. The team decided to proceed in absolute secrecy. They quietly reviewed the movements of officers working that day, but no one stood out as suspicious. With that lead going nowhere, detectives turned their attention back to Ornella's nightlife. She had a wide social circle and was known to frequent local clubs where she easily made friends and was described as warm and approachable. But her openness made things harder. Every night she spoke with new people, and that left too many names, but too few clues. Some detectives still couldn't shake the idea that her father's past might somehow be linked. Maybe the murder had been meant as a message, but the nature of the attack, violent, chaotic, and uncontrolled, suggested something more personal, an act of rage, not revenge. The bruises on her neck and the disarray of the scene painted a haunting picture, one of anger, fear, and a killer who had completely lost control. This pointed to a tragic truth, that the crime might have been born from within Ornella's own circle. As the investigation deepened, detectives began retracing her past and analyzing her digital footprint. After days of waiting, a crucial breakthrough came from surveillance footage taken near the center of Alberti. The footage, captured at 10:17 a.m. on the day of the crime, showed Ornella walking along a street near the town square. But she wasn't alone. Beside her was another person. The image quality was poor, making it impossible to identify who it was. A forensic video team analyzed the figure's build, clothing, and movement patterns, comparing them with other cameras in the area. From that moment, all attention turned toward this mysterious companion. The case had been stagnant for days, but everything changed when the long-awaited phone records arrived. Investigators reviewed Ornella's call logs and messages from the day she disappeared. Most entries showed her usual contacts, family, and friends. But then they noticed something strange, a new number, registered in Alberti, that had never appeared in any previous records. This number had contacted Ornella repeatedly throughout the day, far too often to be random. Most notably, their final call occurred just minutes before her estimated time of death, as determined by forensic analysis. It was a breakthrough. Tracing the phone's registration and tower data, the telecom unit quickly identified its owner. Gustavo Cararoid, a 24-year-old local man known around town by his nickname, Perito. He was quiet, introverted, and generally kept to himself. People who knew him described him as distant, polite at times, but unpredictable, prone to sudden anger. And now, Ornella's phone records revealed that he was the only person she had been in constant contact with that day. The investigation shifted instantly. Detectives opened a new chapter focused entirely on Gustavo, his past, his habits, and his movements on the day of the murder. Though his record wasn't as serious as Ornella's father's, Gustavo was no stranger to the police. He had prior arrests for petty theft, possession of illegal substances, and disorderly conduct. He lived a shadowed life in the poorer outskirts of Alberti, drifting between odd jobs and trouble. Those who knew him described a man of two faces, sometimes charming and sociable, other times volatile and consumed by rage. This duality caught the detective's attention, especially since the attack on Ornella seemed like an explosion of repressed anger, a moment of violence rather than a carefully planned crime. Evidence suggested that Gustavo and Ornella had known each other before. They had crossed paths many times and occasionally talked. Clear proof that the encounter was not random. Interviews with Ornella's friends painted a divided picture. Some said Gustavo admired her from afar, while others hinted that there had been a secret relationship between them. Evidence from the scene showed that Ornella had fought desperately in her final moments. The killer had clearly used brute force to overpower her. If that person was indeed Gustavo, this was more than just an attack. It was the act of a man consumed by obsession. As detectives investigated Gustavo's recent behavior, they uncovered something that raised even more suspicion. A few days before the murder, he had been seen at a local bar acting nervous and agitated, though no one knew why. When this was connected to the revelation that Ornella had been 6 weeks pregnant, detectives began to suspect a dark motive, one born from rage, fear, or both. The key evidence came from the April 10th phone records. There had been an unusually high number of calls between Gustavo and Ornella that day, too many to be casual. Investigators believe this pointed to a hidden emotional bond and that her pregnancy might have been at the center of their conflict. With this, Gustavo was taken into custody. Detectives hoped his first interrogation would bring answers. Instead, he denied everything. He admitted knowing Ornella and seeing her several times around town, but claimed that on the day of the crime, he had said goodbye to her and gone to a friend's house where he allegedly spent the night. But his alibi quickly fell apart. The friend couldn't confirm the exact time Gustavo arrived, and key details of his story didn't match. That alone cast serious doubt on his version of events. Investigators pressed harder, using the phone logs against him. They asked why he had called Ornella so many times on the day she died. Gustavo insisted it was just normal conversation, but the frequency of their contact contradicted that. His statements kept changing, small inconsistencies piled up. Every lie only deepened the detectives' suspicions. Cell tower data placed Gustavo's phone near the northern edge of Alberti, the same region as the crime scene, around the estimated time of the murder. Still, without physical evidence linking him directly to Ornella's death, the police had no legal grounds to keep him in custody, and Gustavo was reluctantly released. But detectives weren't done. They obtained a warrant to search his property. Inside the house, nothing stood out, until they reached a small, messy storage shed behind it, a place Gustavo was known to use frequently. There, they found a pair of mud-caked shoes. Samples were collected and sent to the lab to be compared with soil from the crime scene. Then, another discovery. A worn, dirty jacket buried under a pile of clothes. It had faint, dark stains on the cuffs and chest area. The jacket was carefully sealed and sent for forensic testing. Ornella's phone wasn't found during the search, but days later, investigators caught a break. The phone, which had been inactive since the day of her murder, suddenly pinged a signal. It appeared that someone had inserted a new SIM card. Tracing the new number led them to a young local man who said he had bought the phone second-hand a few days earlier. When asked who had sold it to him, he didn't hesitate. It was Gustavo Cararoid, Perito. That statement shattered weeks of uncertainty. The investigation finally had what it needed: a direct link between Gustavo and the victim. Armed with the new evidence, phone records, and forensic results, detectives arrested Gustavo once again. This time, the interrogation room was filled with tension, and the truth was finally closing in. When the forensic lab results came back from Gustavo's home, the picture became painfully clear. Soil samples taken from Gustavo's muddy shoes matched perfectly with the soil from the field where Ornella's body was found. The stains on the old jacket discovered in his shed tested positive for blood, and the DNA belonged to Ornella. Facial recognition analysis confirmed what detectives already suspected. The figure captured on the surveillance camera was indeed Gustavo Cararoid. When Gustavo was brought back to the interrogation room, his calm demeanor was gone. He was visibly tense, anxious, and aware that there was nowhere left to run. This time, detectives skipped the small talk. They confronted him directly with the evidence. Realizing that denial was useless, Gustavo began to talk. He admitted that he had developed romantic feelings for Ornella, but claimed she didn't feel the same way. According to him, she had told him there could be no future between them, especially now that she was pregnant. Those words, he said, triggered an argument that quickly escalated. Overcome with rage, he lost control and strangled her. Once he realized she was dead, Gustavo confessed to something even more horrifying. He sexually assaulted her lifeless body, then used the nearby concrete blocks to disfigure her in a failed attempt to conceal what he had done. The confession made one thing clear: this was not a premeditated murder, but an act born from rage, rejection, and obsession. Panicking afterward, Gustavo fled the scene, taking Ornella's phone with him. He hid the bloody jacket at home and sold the phone days later to cover his tracks. He also insisted that the unborn baby wasn't his and agreed to undergo any DNA tests required by the court. The confession, combined with the forensic evidence, built a solid case against him. The trial began about a year and a half later, in December 2018, drawing national attention across Argentina. From early morning, crowds gathered outside the Concepcion Judicial Center, holding signs and demanding justice for Ornella. The prosecution charged Gustavo with femicide, sexual assault, and abuse. The trial lasted 2 days, and 27 witnesses, including forensic experts, police officers, and Ornella's mother's attorney, testified. All major pieces of evidence were presented: the security footage, the phone sale receipt, the autopsy, the soil match from the shoes, and the blood traces on the jacket. Gustavo invoked his right to remain silent, offering no defense. His lawyer claimed the evidence was circumstantial, but the court dismissed this argument after reviewing the DNA and facial recognition results. On the evening of December 6th, the jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with a verdict. Gustavo Cararoid was found guilty of the murder and sexual assault of Ornella Dottori and was sentenced to life in prison. The courtroom fell silent, then erupted into applause and tears as Ornella's mother, Natalia, embraced those around her. Outside, hundreds of people cheered and wept, celebrating a long-awaited justice. Though Gustavo's defense appealed, the Tucumán High Court upheld the conviction in early 2019. Today, Gustavo Cararoid remains behind bars, serving his life sentence. But this case became more than a conviction. It became a turning point in Argentina's fight against violence toward women. Ornella's final social media post, "I feel like something bad is going to happen to me," still haunts millions. Every year on April 11th, a silent march is held in her memory across Tucumán. And while justice has been served, some questions remain unanswered, like the identity of the father of Ornella's unborn child. Her story reflects not only the tragedy of a young girl caught in fear, loneliness, and abuse, but also the voice of countless women who refuse to be silenced. Ornella Dottori was only 16 when her life was stolen by a man's rage. Her story, though brief and tragic, lives on as a symbol of resistance, courage, and the unending fight for justice in Argentina. May her soul rest in peace. This is Eternal Crime Files. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next case.